Hi everyone, this is Parker here from TestPrepChampions.com. Today I'm going to be talking about multiple choice tests. I'm going to be sharing a step-by-step approach you can use to excel on virtually any multiple choice tests, and I'm going to give away some other tips, tricks, and strategies that you can start using right away. So let's get started. So I want to start off by saying a little bit about why this is so important. Now, the data shows that multiple choice tests have been increasing in importance every year, and this is despite mixed evidence that these tests even help students achieve learning objectives. Stanford PhD and education researcher Gerald Bracey once said that standardized tests fail to evaluate students on many important character traits like creativity, curiosity, leadership, and integrity, and many other different factors. Now here's a quote from the National Council report. Despite using them for several decades, policymakers and educators do not yet know how to use test-based incentives to consistently generate positive effects on achievement and to improve education. So regardless of whether or not you think testing is best for students' learning, unfortunately, you as a student, whether you're in high school, college, or preparing for an adult education test, whatever your situation is, you might not like testing. I don't like testing, but it's just the nature of the beast that standardized tests are out there. They're really important to do well on. And like I said, standardized tests are increasing in importance every single year. And let's look at just how much testing students are actually facing in schools nowadays to put this all into some context. So according to a 2015 study done by the Council of the Great City Schools, the average student takes over 100 required standardized tests between pre-kindergarten up to graduation in 12th grade. Now here's the data done from that study. This was the study by the Council of the Great City Schools. So they did an analysis. They looked at 66 different schools during the 2014-2015 school year, and so they measured the average number of hours that students spend taking standardized tests per grade level. And what you can see in the chart here is that between 3rd and 11th grade, students spend at least 20 hours a year taking standardized tests. Now it's worth noting that the study didn't consider the time spent taking quizzes and tests administered by the teachers. This is just counting the time spent on standardized tests. And also keep in mind that these results may or may not represent the results of every school district throughout the U.S., obviously. But I still think that this large amount of testing found in the study is pretty staggering. So, as I've been saying, these tests are really important whether you like them or not. Tests like the SAT and ACT have extensive multiple choice portions, which are very important for high schoolers to get into good colleges. Then once they get into college, it doesn't stop there. They're going to face lots of testing throughout college. If you're a college kid right now, in college, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's tons of multiple choice tests, and going from undergrad, making the leap onto grad school, you might have to take a test like the GRE, or even the LSAT or MCAT, depending on what your goals are. Now, if you're an adult education student taking a test like the GED, something like that, you're going to have to be good at multiple choice tests as well. And so, if you struggle with taking multiple choice tests, if you're not great at it, it can be a big disadvantage. And it's really a shame because I know a lot of otherwise really hardworking, diligent students that struggle with multiple choice tests. And I hate to see people not reach their full potential just because of this. But the good news is that, fortunately, anyone can improve their performance on multiple choice tests in just a relatively short period of time. My goal in this presentation is to give you some quick advice and some quick skills that you can start using right away to improve your own multiple choice test taking. So the system that I'm going to be talking about is a 3-phase approach. And so experience has shown that utilizing this system leads to high performance on multiple choice tests. So let me tell you a little bit about how it works. Then we're going to look at each phase individually. So basically, you're going to cycle through the test questions in 3 different phases. Phase 1 is what I call the read and screen phase. Phase 2 is what I call the solve and skip phase. And phase 3, as you can see, is the guess and check phase. Now, before I break this down a little bit more, let's talk about why the 3-phase system works. Well, one of the main reasons why it works is that it helps you combat test-taking anxiety. Often just going into a test with a strategy, any kind of strategy or plan, can make a big difference for your test-taking anxiety levels. Many students suffer from test-taking anxiety, and it can be really crippling, especially when you first get into the test. Your stress levels can spike quickly. Working on the test questions in cycles like this helps you get the nerves out of your system. It relieves the pressure because you don't have to worry about getting everything perfect right off the bat. It allows you to get some momentum going by taking down the easy questions that you can answer right away first. Then as you get settled in, you're going to start working on the harder questions. So this is what we're going to talk about more, but I just wanted to point out a little bit about why the system works. Okay, so phase one. Phase one is the read and screen phase. It's your first pass through the questions. So during phase one, you're going to read all the questions and you're going to answer every question that you can figure out in about a minute or so. Now, depending on the time that you're given, whatever the time limit is, a minute may be too long or it might be too short, so you have to use your own judgment and critical thinking skills, but the point here is that you're not going to have to worry about doing any fancy strategies or even looking too much into reasoning through a question yet. In your first run through, you're just going to go through and pick off the easy questions. Like I said, if it's a question stumping you, you can't get it, try to eliminate all the answers that you can, mark it, and move on. Now, obviously, if you're taking a paper and pencil test where you can write on the test, just go ahead and circle the questions if you're allowed to write on the exam that you're skipping, so that way you know how to go back to them. If you can't, get a piece of scratch paper, mark down the numbers. If the test is computerized, there's probably going to be a mark feature that you can just click right on the screen to mark the questions. If not, just do the same thing, mark it down on scratch paper and come back to them. So again, this is the read and screen phase, and that's exactly what you're doing. You read the questions, pick off the easy ones, screen out the harder ones for the next phases. Okay, phase two. Now, phase two is what I call the solve and skip phase, and this is going to be your most involved phase. It's the phase where you're going to have to apply multiple choice strategies to solve the questions. Now, don't worry, we're going to cover all these strategies in depth shortly, but for now, just understand that during your second run through, you're going to go back through each question that you marked from phase one, and you're going to work on different multiple choice strategies that, again, you're going to learn soon, and you're going to apply them to get the questions right. Phase two is called the solve and skip phase. Again, that's because you're going to solve all the questions that you can, and the ones that you can't, you skip for phase three. All right, so we're on to phase three here, and that's going to be the third cycle through the questions. It's the guess and check phase because that's exactly what you're going to do. Now, there's going to be some questions that you might not know how to answer even after you've applied different strategies. Perhaps you were able to use process of elimination to narrow down the choices, but you still aren't sure what to go with on a few of the questions. Now, hopefully by this point it won't be a whole lot of questions that you have to guess on, but by your third cycle through the questions, you probably aren't going to have time left. So you're going to have to just go with your best guess on anything that you're not sure of, and then you're going to spend the remaining time also reviewing the answers that you've already picked. And you also want to do things like check for errors, like bubble errors on your Scantron, marking maybe the wrong answer on your test booklet, putting the right answer on your test booklet, but bubbling in the wrong thing on the Scantron, forgetting to put your name on the test, things like that that you don't want to overlook. That's what you also want to do during this phase. So again, we're going to look at all these phases in depth pretty shortly, so don't worry about remembering the details now. Just be aware of how they work. So, and hopefully you're going to see the big picture of how this works soon if you haven't already. You can follow the approach phase 1, 2, 3 exactly as I've described it, or you can take from it what you will and use it as part of your own approach. You might want to even go through the test in 4 or 5 or even 6 different cycles. To do this, you could just simply keep cycling through the questions using different strategies until you've cracked all of them or until you've run out of time, whichever comes first. In fact, that's what a lot of students end up doing once they get the basic idea of cycling through the phases down. But again, critical thinking is key. You got to do what's going to work for you. So with that said, let's move on. Let's go now and look at phase 1 more in depth. Here's a brief overview of the phase 1 process. Again, phase 1 is the read and screen phase. First thing you want to do is read through each question carefully. You want to read twice if you can. Once is okay, but twice is even better. You then want to identify exactly what the question is asking. This might sound like common sense, but believe it or not, when you get in there and you have the adrenaline pumping, you're on the test situation, it's really easy to see an answer choice that has information that's factually true, but that doesn't answer the question. So you always want to make sure you know exactly what the question's asking. You then want to note any key indicator words. I like to call these game changers because they can change the game up on you, and we're going to look at these more in a minute, but you want to look for them. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to brainstorm about what you think the answer should be before you go to the answer choices. Now, obviously, this isn't always going to be possible. If the question asks you something like, which of the following is false, you're not going to be able to do this. But in any other case, you always want to try to recall approximately what you think the answer should be before you go to the answer choices. And the reason is just because if there's a trick or a trap in the answer choices and you go to them first, it's really easy to fall for it. So you want to always try to brainstorm about what you think the answer should be, then go to the answer choice and confirm it. And so you also want to, before you pick an answer choice, you want to eliminate any answers that you can and confirm that they're wrong. So you always want to try to reason out in your head or on the page why you think an answer choice is wrong before you just eliminate it. You never want to just assume that a choice is wrong because it feels wrong or because you have a gut feeling that it's wrong. An excellent rule of thumb to adopt for the process of elimination is to only eliminate an answer choice if you can make an argument for why it's wrong. Take the time to mentally explain to yourself why the answer is incorrect really quickly before you eliminate it. Now, obviously, you're not always going to be able to do this, so if you can't eliminate all the answer choices except for one with a high degree of confidence, go ahead, mark the question, screen it out for phase 1, and come back to it later. So how exactly are you going to judge whether or not you should answer a question, mark it, or skip it for phase 2? Well, luckily, this is a confidence scale that you can use to help you make the choice. Now, if you're nearly certain that you have the correct answer, like between 90 and 90%, or 100% confident even, go ahead, put the answer down, move on, go right to the next question. If you're pretty sure that an answer choice is right though, but like, let's say only 75 to 90% confident, go ahead, put the answer down, but mark the question. So you might be wondering, why would you mark a question if you're 75 to 90% sure that it's correct? Why would you mark a question? Why would you take the time to come back to that? Well, the reason is because when you get into the third phase and it's crunch time, you might not have time left to go back and review the answers for every single question. Now, ideally, near the end of the test, you're going to be able to go back and review all of your answer choices to review every one of them. But you might not be able to do this. We all know that during crunch time, sometimes you only have 5 minutes to look over your answers. What do? Well, you want to go back to the questions that you've prioritized to check first. So that's why you're marking something. If you mark something that you're 90 to 99% confident it's correct, just skip it. If you don't have time to check the whole test, skip the ones that you're 99% sure are right. Go to the ones that are you're 75 to 90% confident. Check those first because you weren't quite as confident that those were right. Doesn't that make sense? And so for round 2, what you're going to want to do, so for everything else that you're less than 75% confident of, I recommend screening it out until phase 2. You're going to swing back around then and get all these questions right using different strategies that we're going to look at shortly when we talk about phase 2. The 1-minute rule. So if you're ever working on a question for about 1 minute, you're still not sure of the answer, it's a good idea to mark it, skip it, and come back to it. I've said this before, but it's worth reiterating here. Because on multiple choice tests, you can always guess later if worst comes to worst. So make sure you secure all the points that you can as early as you can during the test. Get all the easy questions right, secure every last point that you can. The ones that you're not sure about, don't waste too much time on them. Don't invest too much in a sinking ship. Mark it and come back. And I mentioned this already, but the 1-minute rule of thumb, it's not always going to work. It's going to vary based on how long your test is and how much time you have to finish it. But the main takeaway here is that on a multiple choice test, or really any test, you never want to spin your wheels for too long on any one question until you first made sure you've got every last point you can on the ones that are easier. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the key indicator words and phrases that I called game changers earlier on. The first one are negatives, and these negatives, they can be present in both the questions themselves or in the answer choices. I recommend taking very careful note of these negatives where and whenever they appear on your test to make sure you don't overlook something and make a stupid mistake. Consider the question, which of the following is true? And then consider which of the following is not true. Note how just inserting the word not in front of the word true changes the entire meaning of the sentence. It changes it so now it asks essentially the opposite of what it was asking before. So make note of anything like this that shows up on your test. So these are some different prefixes here. Non, as you can see on the screen here, non, un, in, il, im, or ear, miss, dis, and d, right? So You don't have to memorize these by any means necessary, but just be aware of these negative prefixes and note that they can completely change up the meaning of a word, either in the question or in the answer itself. So here are some examples here. Consider the sentence here. I want to learn more about non-renewable resources versus I want to learn more about renewable resources. See how there's a total switch up there? It's a completely different meaning. Okay, so the next concept I want to talk about are double negatives. Now, these cancel each other out. Here's an example. Learning math is not unimportant. Consider that versus learning math is not important or learning math is unimportant. Now, whether you like math or not, that's not relevant here. The point here is that the double negative, not in the negative prefix un, these are going to cancel each other out. Here's another example. I never misplaced my room keys. Note the word never is a negative phrase. The word miss, or it's not a word, it's a prefix miss. Those are two double negatives, two negatives in a row, they're going to cancel out. So I never misplaced my room keys. That's just like saying, like I placed my room keys over there, essentially. So don't let these fool you on tests. Now, another game changer I like to talk about are absolutes. Now, these are words like never, all, none, always, and must. So absolutes most commonly show up in answer choices, but they can be in the questions themselves. It's rare on a test or really in anything in life in general for there to be something that's definitely true or definitely false without any exceptions whatsoever. So if you see these words, always be skeptical of the answer choices. They're usually going to be wrong, but again, you're going to have to use your critical thinking skills. They're not always going to be wrong. It's going to vary, but like I said, for something to be just definitely right or wrong, especially on a test that you can't, there's no exceptions at all. That's pretty rare. So this wraps up those game changers, the key indicator words I was going to talk about. Again, I've said this multiple times, but remember that they may be in the questions or in the answer choices, so whenever you see them, just slow down, think twice about the meaning before you go with your first instinct, because if you go with your gut instinct on these questions without really reasoning them through, you could overlook something simple and lose points when there's no reason to. Okay, here's another one, switchback words. So these are words such as like, but, although, and while. Now, switchback words also switch up the original meaning of the sentence. And these are words like the ones I just read on the screen. So again, slow down whenever you see these. Make sure that you're understanding exactly what the question is asking. Slow down, think things through, be skeptical. It's perfectly okay. In fact, that's good. Don't rush it. Don't go too fast. Okay, now we're really done with the game changers and we're on to elimination. So process of elimination is the one strategy that you always want to use for every single question. Now, we all know that during tests, things can go out the window fast. The strategy that you go into the test with can all change just like that. But as much as you can, always try to use process of elimination on every question. If you're able to, I recommend just crossing out the entire answer on your test if you have a written test, rather than just the letter, because it just makes it so much easier. So elimination, it's not just about crossing out answers because you think that they're wrong or because you have a gut feeling that they're wrong, at least initially. The key is to always try to make an argument for why an answer is wrong before you cross it out. Never eliminate an answer just because it doesn't feel right on a test. You never want to rely on your intuition during multiple choice tests unless everything else has failed. Now, you might be wondering, isn't this going to take a lot longer? How am I going to have time to do process of elimination for every single answer for every single question? My answer is, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer, but it shouldn't take you that much longer if you're fast, right? And it's going to help you increase the rate of getting questions right. You just need to take the time to mentally explain to yourself why an answer is incorrect. Perhaps even jot down a few words about why it's wrong to justify it to yourself before you move on. It just makes it so much easier to confirm for yourself that you're making the right choice. Alright, so again, key takeaway here is that you always want to reason your way through each answer choice before you cross it out, as much as you can. It shouldn't take you more than 10 to 30 seconds max if you know the material well. You simply just say to yourself, hey, answer C is wrong because of this, or answer D is wrong because of this. You just want to zero in on something specific. Oftentimes, teachers include totally bogus answer choices that serve no purpose other than to distract you or try to bait you into picking something. So if you recognize those ones, you can just cross them out right away. Now, again, if you can't eliminate all the answer choices during phase 1, just mark it, skip it, and move on. Now, the last thing we're going to touch on here in phase 1 is what I call reservoir questions. These are questions that contain information that you can reuse to get other test questions right. The first thing that I want to talk about as far as reservoir questions is that you always want to look for them whenever you can. Phase 1 is prime time to pick these off. So as you go through questions, if there's a question that you marked, especially, or a question that you had to skip, see if there's a topic that's similar in another question, right? Answer choices questions that have answers like, all of the above are correct. As long as you can confirm, say, you have A, B, C, D, and then E says all of the above are correct, right? As long as you know that A is correct or that B is correct, as long as you know that 2 out of the 4 are correct, you can just mark E as being all of the above are correct, right? So there might be 2 factual statements in there, like say you know that A and B are correct for a fact, but then C and D you're not sure of, but you still know that all of them are correct. Well, look at C and D. You weren't sure about those, but you have 2 factual statements right there that you know are going to be correct. So look at the questions that you marked to see if any of that can be useful, right? So always just look. Sometimes the teachers do this unintentionally. Sometimes they don't really care. They'll just try to give you a freebie. They'll think, hey, if someone's smart, they can reason their way through this. They'll be able to reuse this information. But always, always, always look and see if there's information, whatever it is, that you can reuse. And in phase 1, if you come across a question that you think can help for something else, definitely mark it because it might be useful down the line. Alright, we're now going to talk about phase 2, which is the solve or skip phase. It's the phase in which you're going to apply multiple choice strategies to get the questions right. So we were just talking about reservoir questions, but that's actually the first strategy here that I want to talk about. Always try to recycle information from reservoir questions, questions that are reserves, questions that contain information you can reuse for other questions. Do this whenever you can. So strategy number 2 is to, when in doubt, pick the longest and most precise answer. I've actually had some training before on writing multiple choice test questions where they told us to try to make all answer choices about the same length to prevent students from using this trick. But many teachers and test writers, they don't even know that the trick exists, so you're likely going to have a lot of opportunities to exploit it for your gain on your multiple choice tests. So in general, longer answers are correct more often than shorter answers. This is true even more for when an answer is not only longer than the others, but when it's also more precise. What do I mean by precise? Well, by precise, I just mean more exact, more accurate, containing more facts, containing more information. So sometimes professors put a definition as an answer choice, which happens to have more exact language than the other answers. So keep in mind that test writers often have to add more words to make sure that answers are objectively correct, right? So that there's little room for arguing about or ambiguity about interpreting a correct answer. So sometimes they either take a definition from their notes, put it exactly as it appears as the answer choice, or they'll just need to buff up an answer choice to put more exact words to make sure that answer choice is closer to being objectively correct. So watch out for this. Now, do you want to take this one to the bank and always pick the longest and most precise answer? No. You don't ever want to, there's no absolutes here. You got to use critical thinking skills. Just because an answer is the longest and most precise, it might just be a coincidence. But say you're stuck on a test, you've eliminated the other answers for a question, you're down to a 50-50. One of them is longer and more precise, the other is shorter, less precise. It's a 50-50, you have to guess. I would guess the longest and most precise answer. But that's just me. So on to strategy 3. This one's similar answers. So here's a quick tip. If 2 answer choices are very similar to each other, but they're not similar to any other answers, the correct answer is probably going to be one of the 2. So here's an example. And you might be able to get this example right just because you know American history. But so just for the sake of the example, don't worry about it. I'm just trying to illustrate a concept here. So note answer choice A reads, the war was between Britain and the 13 colonies. And answer choice C reads, the war was between France and the 13 colonies. So see how answer A and answer C are very similar to each other, but they're not similar to any of the answer choices. So this is a good indication that either one of them is going to be correct, right? So A and C are mutually exclusive, meaning that they can't both be true. The war was either between Britain and the 13 colonies, or it was between France and the 13 colonies. Now, of course, if you know U.S. history, the correct answer is clearly A, but the key here is just to recognize that the two answer choices were similar to each other in every aspect except that they both listed different countries. So from this, you could recognize those two answer choices, focus on them, and you could get A as the correct answer if you didn't know this fact off the top of your head. So strategy 4 is the Cornell method for qualifiers. We're going to talk about some grammar rules here. And so a qualifier is basically a word that qualifies or modifies the meaning of another word. Qualifiers are typically adjectives or adverbs, but not always. So here's a list here. Don't let the list intimidate you. You're not, you won't have to memorize this list. It's not going to help you really that much to spend the time memorizing it. When you have multiple choice tests, you have enough stuff to cram into your head. But anyway, just understand the strategy here. So you see these all here, and they're grouped into different families. So whenever you see one of these words at an answer choice, try to replace it with each of the other qualifiers in the same family. Now, if another qualifier from the same family as the original qualifier in the question turns out to be a better fit, the answer choice is probably going to be false, and it can be ruled out. Alright, so just like the list of negative prefixes, it's not going to help you really to memorize it. Just be familiar with the list and understand that when you see these qualifiers on the test, you can always try to plug something in. Like the words, for example, more, equal, and less. Like we could say A is more than B. Now you see B, you could put, sub in the word equal. A is equal to B. Well, if A is more than B, it can also be equal to B. So if you have an answer choice that says, which of the following is false? And it says A is more than B, you put in the word equal, you put in the word less, that one might be false. So again, this is going to require some judgment, but it's not a bad strategy to use. Strategy 5, pick a benchmark. Here's a quick tip. When multiple answer choices seem like they could be right, pick the one that seems most right. And so this is one of my favorite strategies. I think this is actually one of the most effective ones that you can rely on more than any other. So sometimes, when you're going through a test, you might see more than one answer that seems to have some truth to it. So for questions in which multiple answer choices seem plausible, you just have to go with the answer that's most plausible. So how do you use a benchmark? Well, a good way to do this is to make one plausible answer a benchmark and then compare this answer to the others until you find an answer that seems more plausible, which then that's going to become the new benchmark. So for example, let's say that answer A seems plausible. You compare it to B, but B doesn't seem as plausible as A. Then you move on, you compare A to C. It turns out that C is more plausible than A. So you can eliminate A, C becomes the new benchmark. Now, you just have to compare the remaining answers to C. And if neither of those are plausible, C is your answer. The key here is to try to make a logical argument that each answer is more plausible than the benchmark. And if you can't, the benchmark's your answer. If you can, eliminate the benchmark. The new answer that beat the benchmark is your new benchmark, and you keep moving. Hopefully this makes sense. It's really a lot simpler than it might sound. The main takeaway I want you to get here, if nothing else, is just that if more than one answer choice seems like it could be correct, pick the one that seems most correct. Alright, strategy 6 is the counting strategy. It's another one of my favorites. This one's also extremely reliable when it's applicable, so I'm just going to jump right in here and give you an example. Okay, so the question says, the earliest evidence for lemonade was discovered in which country during which year? Now, if you're a real trivial buff, you might know this off the top of your head. If you don't worry about Googling it. You can pause the video if you want, see if you can just reason your way through this, see if you can kind of guess the strategy. But if not, don't worry about it. We're going to look at it right now. So the strategy, the best one to use if you're doing the counting method, is to just count up the number of times that each country shows up in the answer choices. Then count up the number of times that each year shows up. So you see over there how I put Egypt, because it showed up twice. It showed up in both A and in C, right? And so India, it shows up in B, so I put a 1 beside it. That's it. In USA, it only shows up once. It shows up in D, so that's why it's 1. It's the same with the dates. So as you can see, 2000 AD shows up in A, and in B we have 2250 AD, and then in C and D we have 1000 AD, right? So because Egypt and 1000 AD show up the most out of all the answer choices, we conclude that the answer that has both is correct, and so that's C. right? So this is pretty reliable. It's probably the closest thing to a magic bullet strategy that there is in multiple choice tests. But, there is no, I've said this again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, there's no method that's going to always guarantee you the right answer. This is not a foolproof system. It could be wrong. It could be a coincidence that Egypt showed up twice and that the year 1000 AD showed up twice. It could all be a coincidence. It's probably not. The chances are more likely that it is going to be correct, but you never know. Alright, here's one more example. If you want, you can try this on your own using the counting technique. But as always, the way to do it, the strategy is to just start off by counting up the number of times that each drink shows up in the answer choices. This one's actually, it's a little different than the last one, but it's the same principle. So right here you can see the number of times that each drink appears. I've marked it out for you here. So coffee we see shows up 4 times, right? It looks like it's in A, it's in B, it's in C, and it's in D. Orange juice just shows up in A. You can see it right there. If you want, you can count them out for yourself, but you don't have to. And so then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some addition. If you want, you can add these all up. If not, you can just trust my math here. But if we add up the total number of times that each drink shows up, like for example, we counted that orange juice shows up once, we counted that coffee shows up 4 times total, milk shows up 2 times total, Pepsi shows up 4 times total. So right here in answer choice A, we have the 1 from the orange juice. The coffee, we have the 4 here from that. We have the 2 because we counted that milk shows up twice. We have the 4 because we counted that Pepsi shows up 4 times. Add that up, we got 11. And so if you go through this whole process here, you add them all up, we would see that the value for D is the largest. So therefore, it's pretty safe to conclude that D is the correct answer. Now you might be wondering, won't this take a long time to do on a test? And again, it seems like it's going to take longer than what it really will because I'm going slow here just to illustrate the concept. But really, it's not going to take shouldn't really take more than a minute at most. On a multiple choice test, obviously, every minute is valuable. But if it means the difference between getting a question right or getting a question wrong, you definitely want to take the time to do something like this. And so obviously the best defense for any multiple choice test is always to know the material inside out, to study as much as you can. So ideally you won't have to use any of these strategies to get the questions right, but if you need to, go ahead and use them. Get all the points you can. Strategy 7 is reflection. And so some instructors also call this repetition, echoing, but it's all the same thing. So answer choices that contain the same words or phrases as the question are more likely to be correct. So sometimes professors page through their lecture notes while they're writing your tests, and so what they do is they'll come across a bit or bits and pieces of information that they want to cover in a question, and so to write the question, they essentially just take the info blurb out, make it an answer choice, and then they phrase the info blurb into the question, and when they do this, sometimes they unintentionally leave similar words in both the answer choice and the question. So let's look at an example of this. Okay, so here, you don't have to know anything about biology, it doesn't matter, this is just an example. The question is, which of the following is a major component of the blood? A, glial cells, B, ligaments, C, red blood cells, D, neurons. And so, if you're a biology buff, it doesn't matter here. We're just illustrating an example where we see that the word blood appears both in the question and in answer choice C. So that's why we would conclude that answer choice C is correct. So let's say that the professor may have had red blood cells or a component of the blood or something like that written down in their lecture notes or on their PowerPoint slides. Then when they went to make the test, they wanted to ask you a question based off of that statement, and this is what they came up with. So that's kind of how this could happen. It actually happens a lot more than you'd think. Test writers are only human. But on the other hand, some teachers, they either are aware of this trick or they just they want to make a trap question for you. So what they do is they might make this a red herring. So they might use the same word as in the question and they reuse it in the answer choice. It could be a trap, it could always be a red herring. So again, the best defense is to know your stuff well, but if you draw a blank or you're stuck on a question, this is another strategy you can go to and rely on whenever you have to. So next we're going to keep moving here with some database strategies. The last few ones are looking at a database approach. So have you ever heard that you should always guess B or C? I think that this is somewhat of an urban legend by this point, but there is some data out there that you can use, some averages, numbers like that you can always use to help you make decisions on multiple choice tests. And a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about now comes from William Poundstone, who's an author and columnist, and he ran an experiment to try to determine whether or not patterns actually exist on multiple choice tests and for answering multiple choice questions. So what he did was he analyzed a sample of 100 multiple choice tests from 34 different schools and universities, and also from 66 other sources, and it came out to a total of 2,456 questions from all kinds of courses, like college and high school exams, professional exams, even driver's ed exams, and some quizzes and quizzes found in magazines and newspapers. And so Poundstone argues that as much as test writers try to pick their answer choices at random, true randomization is nearly impossible for humans to achieve. Therefore, there will almost always be some kind of pattern present on the tests. And so if you want to know more about his work, the name of the book is Rock, Break, Scissors, A Practical Guide to Outguessing and Outwitting Almost Everybody. It covers all this stuff in more depth as well as some other really interesting stuff. You can check that out if you want, but just so you know, that's where a lot of this is coming from. So one of Poundstone's findings is that all of the above and none of the above answer choices are correct 52% of the time. From my own experience taking tests, I can testify that this sounds about right. So keep this in mind here. So another finding is that true answers are more common than false answers. So from Poundstone's analysis, he found that true answers were correct 56% of the time, and that false answers were correct only 44% of the time. Now, why did he think this? Or why did he find this? His reasoning behind it is that it's easier for teachers to use true information in questions than to make up something false. Right? So, therefore, his conclusion was that teachers generally make less false answer choices than correct answer choices. The second true-false pattern here is also pretty mind-blowing. So Poundstone found that there's a 63% chance that the next answer in a sequence of true-false questions will be different from the last answer. What does this mean? Well, it sounds a little bit confusing, but let's break it down. In other words, if one answer is true, there's a 63% chance that the following answer is going to be false. Let me say this yet another way. Two dissimilar responses in a row, like true-false or false and then true, are more likely than two similar responses, like true, true, or false, false. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the first true-false pattern is that true answers are more likely to be correct than false answers. The second one is that we just looked at is that true answers are more likely to be followed by false answers, and false answers are more likely to be followed by true answers. So the third and final strategy that I want to talk about here puts these two together, and I like to call it the sandwich pattern. So let's suppose that your test has a true-false section. You've answered most of the questions except for a few that you're stuck on. You can check the answers that you know are correct before and after the ones that you're stuck on to use this information to make the best guess. So for example, let's say you're stuck on a true-false question. The answer to the question that you just answered just before the one that you're stuck on is false. Also, you've answered false to the question directly after the one that you're stuck on. Let's assume you're about 90% sure that both of those are correct. What, then, should you pick for the question that's sandwiched in between the two false answers? Alright, so you have one answer that you're stuck on, it's a true-false question, the one right after it is false, and the one right before it is false. So maybe question 1 is false, question 2 you're stuck on, and question 3 is false. To put that into some context here. What do you do? Do you guess true or do you guess false? Well, according to Poundstone's finding that there is a 63% chance that the next answer in the sequence of true-false questions will be different from the last question, you'd want to guess true. Now, if it's the other way around and you're stuck on a question, and you're 90% sure that both the questions before and after it are true, then you want to go with false for the one that you're stuck on. Hopefully that makes sense. So you might be wondering, what if the answers to questions before and after the one that you're stuck on are the opposites? That is, what if you're stuck on a true-false question, and the answer before it's true, and the answer after it is false, right? So say 1 is true, and 3 is false, and you're stuck on 2, or vice versa. Question 1 is true, you're not sure about 2, but question 3 is false. Well, in this case, what you're going to want to do is you want to guess true. Remember, because true answers are more likely to be correct than false answers. So can you see how brilliant this stuff is? Again, when in doubt, this is some good stuff to fall back on. but you always want to try to know the material. If you've memorized from class that something's true or false, that's ideal, but these patterns are useful to keep in mind. Okay, that's phase 2. We're now on to phase 3. Before we go ahead, I just want to give a brief warning that what I'm going to talk about next might be very controversial to some people. Just keep that in mind. I also want to give a big thanks for sticking with me so long into the video. I just want to, say that I really hope that this has been helpful so far and that you're going to find the last section here really interesting. I know I do, because we're going to talk about some psychology of decision making on multiple choice tests, and it's interesting to me, so hopefully you find it fascinating as well. But at this point, we're in phase 3, the guess and check phase. You've gone through phase 1, you did your read and screen, you did your strategies, and what's left now are the questions that you're stumped on, that you're going to have to guess on. The strategies failed, you weren't able to, finish the question, get it right using the strategies, and so you're going to have to guess on those. You're also going to want to balance that with checking answers for questions that you already answered to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. Alright, so what's so controversial? Well, there's a belief that's been pounded into many people's heads, mine included, that you should always stick with your first choice. And really, there's evidence showing that this is not a good rule of thumb at all. There's evidence that shows that actually students who change their answers from a first answer to a second answer actually it doesn't hurt them, it actually helps them. They get the questions right more so than not. I know that's surprising, that might be controversial to some people, so I'm going to present some evidence here. You can make up your own mind, but this is what the data shows. But just to give you a number here, it's estimated that approximately 3/4 or 75% of students have been taught and believe that you always want to stick with your first choice. But in reality, sometimes you should stick with your first choice, sometimes you should change it. It just depends on the question. It's good advice to stick with your first answer insofar as it stops you from panicking, it stops you from second-guessing yourself or stressing out, but at the same time, if your instinct is to change your answer and you're changing a wrong answer to a correct answer, if you don't do that, you're going to get the question wrong. So it really is a case-by-case thing, and the evidence I'm about to present, it comes from research done by Justin Kruger, Derek Wirtz from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, along with Dale Miller from Stanford University. The study was published, I think, back in 2005. It's called Counterfactual Thinking and the First Instinct Fallacy. It's just as relevant when it was first published as it is now or will ever be. So basically, they report overwhelming evidence that students scored worse on tests when they stuck with their first answers rather than changing to another answer. In other words, the research strongly shows that students who change their answers score better than those who cling to their first choice. So here's a quote from the study. One comprehensive review found that in not one of 33 studies were test takers hurt on average by changing their answers. So in other words, the vast majority of the students in the study who changed their answers in 33 different studies all scored higher because of it, and their decision to change their answers didn't negatively impact their scores. Here's another mind-blowing quote from the study. Most answer changes are from incorrect to correct, and people who change their answers actually improve their scores. So, in other words, this is basically saying that, hey, you know what, if you change your answer, it's going to benefit you. And so, why? Why does that make sense? Why have we been told, why do so many people believe, jumped ahead here on the slides, why do so many people believe that you should always stick with your first choice when the facts show that students who change their answers do better? Well, it all comes down to a psychological phenomenon known as counterfactual thinking. So, exactly what is counterfactual thinking, you might be thinking? Have you ever reflected on a decision that you made and then said to yourself, well, if only I had just done this instead? Thoughts like this are examples of counterfactual thinking. And to give a definition, counterfactual thinking is basically the tendency to brainstorm alternative scenarios to life events that have already played out and can no longer be changed. So according to the study, we remember instances in which we change correct answers to wrong answers more so than instances in which we change wrong answers to correct answers. So have you ever watched the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? For those who don't know, it's basically a game show where contestants are asked trivia questions, multiple choice style. If they get enough right, they're going to win up to $1 million. And Imagine that you're on this show, you're playing for $1 million, you don't have any lifelines, you're on the last question, you get the question right, you go home with $1 million, you can throw it in the bank, buy a new car, give it to charity, whatever you want to do with it. And imagine that if you get the answer wrong, you don't take the $1 million. You're still going to make some money, you're going to come away with some big bucks, but it's not $1 million, right? And that's, if you're going on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you want to win the big money if you have the chance to. So imagine that, you think the answer is A. Then you say it's answer A, and they ask you, is that your final answer? They put you on the spot, they freeze you up, they make you second guess yourself. And so then what you do is, let's say that you change to a second answer. You change from A to C. And then you find out that your second answer was wrong, and that if you had just stuck with the first answer, answer A, you would have gotten the question right. You would have left with $1 million. Now, I think we can all agree that in that scenario, it would be really, 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 really frustrating to have $1 million right there in your face and to not get it. So, according to the researchers, though, this would be more memorable and more frustrating than if you had stuck with your first answer and gotten it wrong. Right, so in other words, if you had stuck with A, if they had asked you, is this your final answer, and you said yes, A is my final answer, and that was actually the wrong answer, yeah, it'd be really frustrating, but you wouldn't feel nearly as bad as if you had first guessed the right answer and then changed it to the second answer and gotten that wrong when the first answer was right. And so the investigators say that changing an answer when one should have stuck with one's original answer leads to more if-only self-recriminations than does sticking with one's first instinct when one should have switched. As a consequence, instances of the former are more memorable than instances of the latter. End quote. So in general, the advice that you should stick with your first answer comes mostly from the fear of regretting the choice to change your answer if you're wrong after the fact. The frustration of changing a correct answer to an incorrect answer leads to these instances being more memorable than instances of sticking with an incorrect answer. So, I'm not just going to leave you hanging here. Let me give you two of my best strategies and tricks for handling these kinds of situations, because it really can freeze a lot of people up if they're not sure if they should go with their gut and stick with their answer or change to another one. And there's really no easy way to do this. It is tough sometimes. It just takes a lot of experience. But holding on to a belief like, oh, you should just stick with your first answer, that's not really the best way to go about it. You don't want to just stick with an answer because it was your first guess, right? You want to think your way through it. You want to try to use logic and reason, try to figure it out. So if you go through questions and you get a gut feeling that a certain answer is right, what you can do is you can cycle back through, give it some time, come back around to it, and see if you get the same gut feeling, right? So let's say that during your first run through the questions, for one particular question, you eliminate down to two choices. Let's just say, for example, C and D. And you're pretty sure it's D, but you suspect that it could be C. Do you just go with your first instinct, go with C, or what? Well, if you cycle back through the questions and you read the question again, you read the answers again, you get the same gut feeling about D, then yeah, if you have nothing else to go on, yeah, that's a good indication that D is your best choice, right? Now, if you cycle back through and you don't get that same gut feeling, instead you think that the second time you go back through, you get the gut feeling about C, then, maybe you should go with C instead. It's a judgment call, but you really want to stop and reason your way through it, right? You really should do that anyway, even if your gut instinct is C both times. But it's especially important if the first time your gut instinct tells you it's D, then the second time through your gut instinct tells you it's C. You want to stop, reason your way through it, make an argument for both of those. That's the next strategy I want to talk about. And this is really a key strategy. It's really helpful here. You want to try to make an argument for both of those. So if you're not sure if it's D or C, make an argument for both. Maybe even make a tally right on your test. Tally it up. Who cares? Think of all of the reasons why you think C is correct. Maybe C is correct because of this, this, and this. That's three things right there. And then look at all the evidence for D. Make a tally for every reason you can think of why D would be the correct answer. And, see if you can think of more reasons. If you can list 5 reasons why D would be correct, 3 reasons why C would be correct, go with D. All right, so you want to make an argument, see which, pretend you're a lawyer, just really get in there, make an argument, be an advocate for C. Make an argument for why C is right, make an argument for why D is right. Whichever one you can make the best case for, make the easiest case for, that's the one that you go with. So this is kind of similar to what I was talking about earlier with benchmarking, right? So the benchmarking strategy where you have 2 answer choices that you think could be correct. They both seem plausible. Go with the one that's most plausible. It's the same principle here. But there's really no easy way to do this. It's tricky. But rather than just picking an answer because that's what your gut told you, you want to stop, reason your way through it, try to make an argument, cycle back through, see if you get the same gut feeling. If you cycle back through, you get the same gut feeling, then that's more evidence for that answer. And so that's about it, guys. Again, thanks a lot for watching. Over on our website, testprepchampions.com, you can download a PDF, 30 instant tips for multiple choice tests, completely free. It basically takes some key points from this whole entire lesson, and it takes 30 of the best bullet points, puts them together for you if you want to use that to review before a test. It's right there on the website. I just want to end by saying that some of the strategies I've talked about today might seem counterintuitive or might go against the grain of what you've been taught and what you've been told before. I'm not asking you to change your approach. I'm just suggesting that if you're not getting the results you want, you're not getting the grades you want on multiple choice tests, why not try something different? Why not try something new? What are a few things that you can take away from this and apply to your multiple choice test taking? Because you really have to take action. That's the key here. Take a couple things away from this, if nothing else. Try those, use those in your test taking. Now, if you want, you can take everything here, the three-phase approach, take everything that I just taught, use all of it, or you can, throw away most of it and take 2 or 3 things away. But whatever you do, don't neglect this information. Think about it, use some of it. Your grades are going to go up, your test scores are going to go up. So, thanks a lot, guys. If you have any questions about anything, you can reach me on my website, www.testprepchampions.com, or leave it in the comment section below, whatever works. If you like this video, let me know, and there'll be more coming at you soon. So thanks again, guys. Take care. Best of luck to everybody, whether you're taking a standardized test like the GED, SAT, or you're a college student, whatever it is, good luck to you, and we'll look for more stuff from Test Prep Champions.